They say 26 times the charm, Roland. That's
Oh, oh,
the famous German expression, right?
yeah, it
You're
is.
so
It
fond of
is. Yeah,
those.
yeah, 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 yeah. Of course.
26 times the charm.
Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast, where we demystify enterprise architecture and business process management.
We're here to bring best practices and lessons learned from our years to your ears, as well as interviewing friends we've met along the way on our professional journeys.
My name is Roland Volt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, James Erlinson.
Hey, JM, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Roland. It's been a very long week. I posted about LinkedIn on this. I closed the 14th year of the festival that I run in a charity that supports music education for children. It was a fantastic event. There were like thousands and thousands of people who came. We sold a lot of tickets, but more importantly, we reached a lot of singers and singers to be. And so it's been a really exciting but very tiring time for me. How have you been, my friend?
I can imagine. I can imagine. I still didn't make it to Toronto, so damn. Um, I'm doing okay, So that's the. I said it to one client. I said, okay, your 4 stars in the fatherland are 5 stars in the rest of the world, so please give us 5 stars.
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about hotels. There's
No,
a
no, no, no. I
actually,
mean
it's a funny
ratings.
expression.
I mean
A
ratings.
friend tells me that she says the only 5 stars in Alaska are in the sky. Hotels apparently are not as.
Yeah. Hopefully I will see that. But otherwise, I was thinking, and this is obviously the last episode of season 8, and I was thinking, was season 8 great?
Oof,
And I
it
was
certainly rhymes with great.
oh yeah, but it's I was looking back and I was thinking like, oh man, we published the first episode of this season in January, and what has happened since January? And besides that, it feels like 2 years,
It really
So
does.
yeah, I was thinking, we became an official publisher, right? So what's your
Yay!
baseline publication? They ripped me off for the ISBNs, but I cried enough about that topic. A book came out. The book is in progress. If one of the two of us finds some time to babble in his
One,
microphone,
this
I can
one.
do that too. Yeah, this one.
Oh boy!
No, it's
Oh,
a. Anyways, so if one of the two of us could babble in his microphone, we might have an audiobook next month. We'll
yeah, I'd like
see.
that. I'd like to see that very much. Wait, that's
Um,
me. Oh no! Ah!
well, you said you're wrapping up stuff, and I found a very nice group of people. So kudos to Randolph, Katrin, Markus, Matusz, Mirko, who look at the German translation, of it, which hopefully we get done in July-ish. We'll see. And then I'm happily writing on the second book, and um, maybe the most important one, when this episode will be published, there might be a What's Your Baseline LLC being filed, and we might be a serious business, which is obviously great, you know. It helps us if somebody follows our advice from the podcast to not getting sued.
Yes, I mean that's the thing is that we want to reflect on this last period of creation because it really has been a lot of making things. Primarily, you making a book, us building a company.
Mhm.
This idea of creating a sustainable sort of knowledge sharing tool for everybody. I mean, What's Your Baseline as a podcast is great, but there's so much more that can be done. So I know the
Yeah.
What's Your Baseline.com as a website has had things like tools on it. Now it has the book on it, has more things, more products, if you will, that are coming out to help share the awareness, the ability, interest and excitement around BPM. But for those of you out in podcast land, normally I ask at the very end of the show if you can give us feedback or send us an email at hello@whatsyourbaseline.com. But I'll start at the top of the show saying, right now, more than anything, we want to hear from you as to what you want. because we
Yeah.
have an exciting season next one coming out. Season 9 is going to be coming out in the summer. Yeah, I know it's great. We're actually heading towards our episode 100, which I think is going to be somewhere in the realm of October.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for some exciting announcements about that. But in the meantime, your ideas, your inspiration go a long way into helping us fuel the next iteration of each episode of the podcast of the company. It's important to us. So please.
And yeah, please. Yeah, I agree. Keep it coming. But if JM, if season 8 was great, I hope we can do better than season 9 is fine. Right? So
It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
fine.
Ah. Well,
But
speaking of keeping things from just being fine, we also wanted to have this opportunity today to talk about something really near and dear to our hearts,
yeah.
which is the topic of today's show, and a really important one for the two of us, both of whom have acted in this role in the past, and who work with a lot of people in this role. And of course, if you're here and you've seen the title, we're going to talk today about solution architecture as a practice for practitioners, some guides for how it might be carried out, what you might need, and why it's important for you. So, before we even get started in defining a lot of the value of it, let's just start by defining the term itself. So,
Mhm.
Roland, if you wouldn't mind giving me the Coles notes, as we say, of what is the practice of solution architecture? What does it involve? What should people be aware of? And if you're not doing it, what should you be looking at to do?
So let's say first what it is not. It is not what the vendor calls a pre-sales person, right? To get that out, it's even though it has aspects of solution architecture in there, so it's not 100% wrong. But I think the big difference is between the enterprise focus of enterprise architecture and then the narrower focus of solution architecture. And by that, and we will talk about that in a minute, I mean um, that one stage in the solution lifecycle that is definitely focused on that. So, long story short, I think we're talking about a structure approach for designing and then later implementing change. And change could be from implementing technology, right? We're getting rid of app A and replace it with app B, or we enhancing app A, or we're just changing app A because we can, you know. But it also could go more towards process changes and org changes and all the things that we spoke about, for example, with Luca in our latest episode when we were talking about mergers and acquisitions. They better come up with some good solution architecture, how they want to change, because you need to get that change being described in an understandable way so that somebody can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. But
Yeah.
JM, where do you put solution architecture? And I'm before we go into the different phases of solution architecture, but where do you put it in that life cycle?
I see solution architecture kind of as taking three of those bubbles we'll talk about. And
Hmm.
I'll tell you sort of why and how that works. So generally, I see solution architects as the bridge between data and implementation. So you say, I'd like to take the information about how this is being performed and some requirements that are being put out. Then I want to align that with my business needs. So that's a high level design and program roadmap. So I
Hmm.
want to be aligned there. I want to be hands-on in designing solution itself, so solution design, and I'd like to see it through to the first stages of implementation so that I can support how it's rolled out. And that mentioned the word change. It's not you. There are people who are focused more specifically on change, but you want to keep your finger on the pulse. So I see that as those three pieces that they're primarily focused on. People who are sort of executing process and monitoring day to day, not as much. And people who are doing the process analysis and like the ideation for new change, not as much. So I see it really in three of those
Hmm.
five bubbles primarily. And it's obviously strongest in the solution design side of things, which is
Yeah.
that translation effort we talked about. What do you
Well,
think, Roland?
I would not say that it stops at the middle of implementation. I would say it includes the implementation, because and we had a full episode about the solution lifecycle many, many years ago. I will put the link in the show notes as well, because what do you see? Somebody says, "Oh, we're gonna do the change," describes it, and we'll talk about what to do there, and gets a thumbs up, and then he hands it over to development, and then that poor developer doesn't get answers for questions, so they make assumptions, and the implemented solution might look different than what was approved. So you would have to keep those two things in sync, the what was designed and what was implemented, and hopefully it's the same. In my experience, it's not in many cases. And then the last step is, once you're done, your as implemented, which hopefully looks like the as designed, becomes the new what runs, for the high level repository, so that the next guy can do his own analysis. So I think it's all three, right, that you would have to do. And the second thing is also, it might span multiple projects.
True.
It might span multiple programs, where you have dependencies there. So it has that project management aspect to it as
There's a
well.
project management aspect and also a communication aspect. I feel like a
Oh,
big part
sure.
of solution
Yeah.
architecture is socializing the roadmap of the solutions that you are developing or responsible for developing and supporting, socializing that with partners across the organization. And we also see solution architects distributed across the business. And so talking to other solution architects, talking to lines of business to speak about capabilities that are coming up so they can better plan their needs versus this capabilities of the organization. Like that's to me really important. And the other thing about this communication thing is not just preventing crashes, but also making sure that things work the way that you want them to, and that people can take advantage of them. And that's about understanding,
Well,
establishing like a very clear enablement program for what you're doing in terms of feeding that enablement program with the right information and making sure that it goes.
yeah, but I think that's two different aspects, or
Yeah.
maybe three, right? The first one is figuring out what to change and how, right, on a very high level. The half-page document. We want to, whatever, reorganize and have a shared service group for X, right? And somebody needs to do a business case. Hint, hint. We had a shorts about business cases. Link below. But it's also, that's not really solution architecture. That's more the description of what should be done. Then you have the second step, which is the solution architecture development itself, the solution design, where you create artifacts, right, with all that stuff that I just said, as designed, as implemented, and so on. And then you have a phase afterwards where you use those artifacts. Because once you implement it and you go live, you're done, right? As a solution architect, you typically move on. Well, maybe you help out in some post go live support, but in general, you created your artifacts, you've done your job, you hand it over to the right people, like the change management guys, and they do their thing. So
Yeah.
I think solution architects are involved in that first phase. They're heavily in that middle phase, and then whatever, as a support person in that third role. Do you
Yeah.
agree?
I do, and just to summarize this, so we want to move on to sort of the more of the why. I see solution architects involved. So just to lay it out in understanding the business, so understanding business needs, being
Mm-hmm.
able to understand the vision of the solution that you're trying to design towards, and scoping that solution. So what are the requirements that are going to have to go into it, functional and non-functional requirements that you can distill from a wide variety of sources. So needs, vision, scope, then developing the solution architecture itself, which is a design for how you're going to achieve that. And once again, solution architecture, we talk about in IT context a lot, but solution architecture is an organization conversation, can take a lot of
Yeah.
different forms.
Yeah.
Then you refine it, bringing stakeholders in, gain consensus, socialize it, and then help to implement it. All those things put together, that's a solution architecture like discipline. But it is also very complex and requires a lot of other skills. I mean, you heard here a technology knowledge, you heard
Yeah.
here a business context, you heard here a communication and change management skill set. I mean, to those of you who are solution architects out there, we salute you. This is a difficult discipline as a combination of skills and responsibilities.
Let me ask you a question, JM. Um, if you're a solution architect, do you need to know everything? Should
That's the
you be
idea. It's
able?
it's just
Should you
it's like a
really?
politician. If politicians had to know everything, no one would be in politics. But what you need to have is really strong relationships.
Hmm.
Relationships with experts across the business. Like I would say when I was working in solution architecture, maybe a good 30% of my job, maybe too much, but who knows, was just making intros and like knowing who's who in the zoo, being able to make sure that I could call on somebody at the right time to provide expert advice in a domain that I was maybe weaker in, or to defer that to them and helping to give them ownership of it. So when it was time for me to go and ask them to do something hard, they were already bought into it. So I
Yeah,
think that that's the thing. You don't have to know everything, but you do have to know a lot of people.
yeah. I would say it slightly differently, and I do not disagree. Um, it's I think you need to have that more visionary aspect, even though that's quite a mouthful. You need to see the bigger picture and how it aligns. You don't necessarily need to know how the technology works in the 37th level, right? But you need to know somebody who knows that, and you need to bring that guy on, and you need to take whatever that guy produces and make it fit into the bigger picture that you're responsible for as an solution architect. But um, if we talk about that JM, what would you see as the different steps in a solution architecture? So if and we're going to talk about that in ad nauseum in the second part when we talk artifacts and all that stuff. But give us a high level rundown. I'm too lazy to count. It's like 7 or 8 different things you put in our little cheat sheet here. What are the highlights of what a solution architecture activity checklist could look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially what you want to do is you're looking to get a combination of alignment, design, and execution. So what you're looking to do is first and foremost understand the business goals and requirements. So get a clear picture, get documents that you can very clearly refer back to, and validate those documents with your stakeholders to ensure that you have a clear picture of what you're being asked to do and why that's important.
Hmm.
The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we understand the ecosystem around this. So you're going to do a lot of discovery of what your existing systems are, capabilities that you have in the organization that you need to be able to tie into or dovetail with, so you're not looking to overlap or replace unless it's intentional. Then you need to understand those things and their roadmap and how you're going to fit into it. So you're building
Hmm.
a life cycle that includes you and whatever solution you're going to define into it. And now you've fallen in love with the problem. Now let's start to take a look at the actual solution itself. What is a vision for what that might look like? What would be the experience as a user? What would be the way of working as a person in the organization that would be working under that solution? Then you're going to develop a detailed design for that solution. That design document becomes sort of the canonical source upon which the solution is going to be built. It's going to be refined. It's going to be changed. It's going to have a lot of people putting their information into it. But ultimately, you're owning that design document for now. What components do you need from a technology perspective? What physical components, hardware, software, things you need, applications and services, people, what data are you going to have to touch? What security concerns are you going to build? What's the architecture patterns that you have established in your organization that you're going to follow to make sure that you don't fall afoul of the ARB? And so, how do we couch this entire document with all the sections that will make sure that anyone looking at it gets what they need from it? Then comes evaluation and refinement with your stakeholders. So remember that first step when you went out and made sure you knew everyone? Well, now you're
Hmm.
going to come back to them and say, here's the design document that I have that takes care of your needs. Does this work? And let's iterate on this together as we look to pass this on to our teams for implementation. Then you split into two streams. One is technical team. Let's work together, as you mentioned before, to make sure that you can do this and that when you do this, it most closely resembles the functional requirements and non-functional requirements of the solution we're trying to do. Once again, it could be change management, could be org implications, it could be IT, because there could be systems implications, that's fine. Similarly, you're looking to start the communications process with your change management specialists. What information have we developed? How is this going to work? What do people need to know? What are some timelines on the roadmap so that I can start to socialize this out? And then as things drive into their final implementation, you're there on the team to support the people who are ultimately talking about it. The tech teams who are running it and the people who are changing the organization and having those difficult conversations about how we're going to change our way of working. And then you move on. You archive the documentation. You make sure that it's set into ideally a living repository that talks about the way that we work. And then you prepare for the next iteration with the next project, the next vision, the next requirements, and the next piece of solution architecture you're going to do. Does that make sense to you, Roland?
It does. It does. I'm just wondering what we're talking about in part 2 of this show, but that's a different story.
No, the specific stuff. Here's the thing. I'm talking in generalities because the truth is
Yeah.
that there's a couple of different ways to do this. We'll talk about this in part 2, but the cycle looks very similar. I don't know if I've seen a lot of solution architecture teams that work wildly different than this because it's kind of that's what the practice is. I have seen people skip steps in that, like, for instance, communicating effectively with their business partners or their
Yeah.
IT teams.
And then
I
they
was
drop
working
it.
I worked with a pretty big, how do I anonymize this properly? Let's just say retailer. How about that? A lot of people will know their name if I mentioned even anything more about them. And I remember we had a solution architecture team that was working on a pretty big implementation of they were doing some sort of like new stocking system or whatever. It was like
Mhm.
making sure that the products were on the shelves to sell and they were tracking where everything was. And it was tied in with like all planograms and stuff like that, working with other things so they can know what stuff was going to go with what in which store. Anyways, long story short is that simultaneously they had another team that was working on an ERP re-engineering and they were decommissioning services. There was a huge technology rationalization project, and the solution architects were because they were in different business units refused to talk to each other, but the systems that they were working with were the same underlying technologies. And because they didn't know each other, they didn't care to know each other, they didn't try to communicate. Ultimately, when the ERP systems got implemented, which what happened first, the second project was relying on technologies that was there that was 5 minutes ago were working couldn't run anymore. And they had to actually roll it back because part of this communications job just wasn't done properly. The impact analysis wasn't done. And ultimately it wasn't evangelized to the rest of the company, except for in name only, which means there was a ton of people excited to do something that they functionally could not anymore. And solution architecture, sorry folks, you were the glue that just stripped apart.
Which brings me to another question, and that might be the last question before we go into our little break. Where should those solution architects sit? Should they be in
Ooh.
IT? Should they be in the COO organization? Should they be in the business units?
That is a tough question. I why don't I give my idea first, and then you tell me how I'm wrong.
Uh-huh. Well, I don't
I
know
mean,
if there's a right and wrong.
well, here's the thing. I see a lot of solution architecture falling under sometimes like they're claimed by the office of the CIO,
Mhm.
which I don't like at all
Mhm.
because I mean, from my perspective, solution architecture is ultimately serve purpose to serve as a business, right? That's ultimately what you're trying to do. If you're not serving the business, then you're not helping to
Yeah.
grow the organization. And a lot of the other parts of what you do is risk mitigation. So if you're sitting under the CIO, all you're going to talk is tech, or primarily what you're talking is tech.
Yeah.
I've seen it under COO. I've seen it divided into lines of business, which can be really the retailer I was talking about. That was a fragmenting situation where just lines of business weren't communicating with each other at that level. Where would I like to see solution architecture? Ultimately, I'd like to see that as a shared service and a shared service under something like the COO. Or even under the CRO, risk officer, if you're looking at organizations that are heavily regulated, where the solution architecture and its implications to risk and regulation are really important.
Mhm.
And seeing it as a shared service means that as a centralized function, you have communications built in because your team is right there and the various projects they work on are physically adjacent because of the human beings. And that maybe mitigates a little bit of that stuff we talked about before, but not
Yeah.
talking to each other? Where
I
would you like to see it though?
I see. So I agree with 50%, 80% what you said. I
Whoa,
think, yeah, well,
that's a high number. Normally it's like 20.
yeah. Oh, damn, I flipped the scale. Um,
Oh
I
boy.
think I think it's wrong within IT, right?
I
For
know.
the same reason that you just said, because then you have just tech heads talking about technology and don't care about the rest. I also agree with you that it should be a shared service, right? But the question is, where do you put that shared service in your org chart? And that might differ from place to place, organization to organization. But I would love to see it uh, under the people who define the strategy, right? Because what you do is you say, okay, where do we want to go? And we spoke about that in previous episodes. Architects have a place there, while you have the outward market facing perspective, you need the inward. Can we even do this? Where are we perspective that architects come up with, which is more the enterprise level, right?
Mhm.
But then those enterprise level architects, where they need, I don't want to say that the brain, that's it's not nice.
Maybe they're the nervous system. I don't know. It's they're what it tells you something's gonna hurt.
Yeah, no, yeah, that they're thinking about, okay, what is it where we need to improve,
Yes.
right? In the different various aspects of an architecture. They don't define how it's improved, right? So
No.
when you think about the 2x2 that I put in the book, and I will put it again in the show notes, it's you need to have people figuring out what to do. You need to have that project management type person that I call transformation agent in that 2x2. But then
Mhm.
you have the third thing, which is the people who actually make it happen, right? One is the general on the hill. The other one is the whatever battalion commander who organizes everything. But then you still need troops, right? Who do the actual fight. And I think the best place in my mind, and I'm curious what our audience thinks about that, um, is in that shared service to avoid exactly the situation that you had described, when it's under a business unit, which would be my second preferred place, by the way, right?
Hmm.
If it's under a business unit and then the business units don't talk to each other because one head doesn't love the other one, whatever, right? You take out that tension.
Mhm. Well, that's a thing question for a lot of our audience out there. Where have you seen solution architecture? Is there a established practice in your organization for solution
What is solution
architecture?
architecture?
Yeah, what is solution architecture to you? Who recognizes that, and have you met one? And if you do have solution architecture, where does it sit? How is it effective or not effective? And what might you do to place solution architecture as a higher priority for you and your organization? We'll come back with a moment in a moment for our second section, a little bit more about the how of solution architecture.
I gotta get out of here. I gotta get out of here. I'm climbing up the walls. I gotta get out of here.
And welcome back. Jam, it's super exciting that you and I agree on something. I didn't expect that to happen so
The
quickly.
first time for everything, Roland.
Yeah, it's episode 93. I thought we saved that for episode 100. But I think what we didn't talk about before the break is that there are also other roles being involved. And I
Yeah,
just
there
want to
are.
make it clear so that nobody has some ambiguity in there. So we spoke about the enterprise architect, the high level visionary, if you will. Where does it go? And then we spoke about the solution architect, the guy who actually makes it happen, who coordinates on that solution level, which is the thing that you produce, right? So I said it in the break, the puzzle, right? Somebody needs to
Mhm.
cut a puzzle piece according to spec so that it fits together with other stuff. I think what we missed in that picture is that there are maybe a couple of layers in between, right? Because there's that pesky thing called organization. You
Mhm.
alluded to it a little bit, So you might have different segments in your architecture, right? Which could be by business domain, you know. and they want to have some independence. So they might not be a big fan of having a centralized governance model. But even within that, most likely those org units, those domains, do not have just one project and focus on that one project, right?
Yeah.
So there might be some levels of coordination in between, right? So when I think about scaled agile, they're talking about the small solution, if you will, and the large solution, right?
Hmm.
So large solution in the sense of a lot of moving parts that need to come together, and you need somebody who coordinates that,
Yeah.
right? While you also need then somebody who coordinates the coordinators in some point. So you could
Yeah.
make that like a Russian doll, where you drill down and nested things. But I think there's a role for, I don't know, solution portfolio manager, if you will,
Yeah.
right? Who's not tasked with cutting out the puzzle pieces, but who should know, yeah, we're building this 100-piece puzzle. And there's, by the way, a series of puzzles. There's 2 and 3 more that will be built
Hmm.
in parallel. And by the way, together there would be an awesome panorama if, dear
Oh
customers,
yeah.
you buy all 3 puzzles. You know what I mean?
I do. I actually work with guys like that. I worked at a big utilities company a while ago,
Mhm.
and there was a. I remember they brought in a whole crew to do this big this whole set of implementations. A lot of different things going on. A lot of like solution architecture for each of these different capabilities the organization was looking to stand up through a single solution.
Mhm.
And the way that it worked is they brought in a project manager and program manager team. They said,
Mhm.
"We don't go out independently. We go out together. So you wanna get us, you get this program manager and a series of project managers. Each one was managing a solution that they were deploying as part of a larger puzzle pieces of a larger picture they were creating for the organization. I think that's really important. That's part of why communication is so important. If you don't
But
have those
it's
conversations, you're not gonna be able to fit yourselves in properly, right?
yeah, but to be very, very clear, the solution architect is not the project manager,
No, 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 no.
right?
But they're
So
working with project manager.
yes, but the
And
point
they're
is,
getting the context from a program manager that they're going to
you
need.
yeah, but you need to make sure that you don't overdo it. I've seen that in organizations. I was in one uh big home loan company.
We keep having to anonymize these things because it's
Yeah, it's the
because
other
they're
one.
obvious. We
Whoever
work with
listens to
really
it,
large companies. It's
it's the other one, right?
yeah.
And they were so proud. Oh yeah, we do that big transfer. It's like, I don't know, 15 years ago, right? Uh, and they say, oh, we do that big transformation. Let me lead you to our war room. Right? And I said, oh, interesting. Yeah. And then they literally had an empty office and the wall was plastered with Gantt charts and whatnot. I said, yeah, we got
Oh,
135 projects going on right now. And I just thought by myself, you're doomed. You're
yeah. That's the
doomed.
most expensive wallpaper we've ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I think you need to find a balance between how much of that coordination you put in, because some organizations might go wild and then they forget to remember that they were tasked to create a puzzle and cut out a little puzzle piece, out of cardboard.
Let's talk about if you are thinking about a solution architect. Tell me about the most common tools that a solution architect might employ in each of the things they do, from discovery to ideation and vision setting to communication to solution design itself to implementation support. Like, what tools do they use to make that work?
Yeah, I think we need to define the word tool,
Sure.
right? Do we talk software? Do we talk
Yeah.
templates? Do we
Yeah.
talk
Digital
methods?
tools, or like methods.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those sorts of things. Everything that a solution architect needs in their, you know, metaphorical tool belt in order to do their job.
So I think the first thing that they need is a map. They need a map of what are the different sources that I actually talk about, So, for example, do we have an app repository? What information is in there and how good is the quality of that? Right?
Uh-huh.
Because if it's crap, you know, you might not want to look at it, or wrist or org or whatever, right? And the funny thing is, when I go into organizations, I typically don't see org charts, right? Which at least when I grew up was the big thing, because you were important. The box had your name on it. Um, so the map to understand what is the information that you need to actually do a solution architecture.
Yep.
The second thing, and we wouldn't be a podcast about demystifying EA and BPM, and have spoken about that a gazillion times, is you need an architecture tool, right? There's different flavors of that, right? The two most common ones, or three most common ones that I see, is the modeling tools, right? Where people handcraft pixels and push pixels. I see more form-based database tools, right? And we
Yep.
could name names, which I don't want to do,
Sure. We do.
because we're an
We
equal
we are
opportunity
we are
tool
vendor
vendor, right?
agnostic.
Yes. And the third one, which fits slightly in there, are all those specialty tools that you might need. And I'm now naming names, like risk tools like Archer or Metric Stream,
Yeah.
or
They do one thing real
your
well.
identity and access management tool,
Yeah.
SailPoint, for example, where you say, okay, they have runtime information, if you will, in there that is useful. So that's the type of tools. I think the third one that I would look at is less tools, but it's how you apply it, and that is your communication layer. So you create your architecture tool, whatever you pick. You create your drawings and whatnot. The good tools do have a communication layer, but then the vendors are greedy and they charge you an arm and a leg for just viewing it, right? So how do you communicate this? So now you need to have things like an intranet or a wiki or whatever, right? So that your org change management people that you should have in your group of super guys who do changes, that they can use as a platform. And that's not only just pull, like a wiki. Oh, here it is. Go look it up yourself. But it's also push, right? So I'm talking about dashboards. Well, that's also pull, if you will. I'm talking about active communication. Like Discord servers, right? Regular brown bag sessions. Whatever you come up as a communication vehicle, but you need some technology. We're talking tools that help you communicate, right? And everybody in the organization should know, this is the place where I have to go to be informed about where we're heading. So the other tools that you use, your architecture tool, your systems of records and all that type of stuff, they need to be able to assemble this and make it accessible. Wow, a lot of
Yeah.
words. What do you think?
I like that a lot, and I think it also leads to, yeah, those are really important things. I mean, I would want to have all those set up for me. I would also want to have a centralized space where I can keep information besides like an architecture or a modeling repository for the content I want to analyze and improve on and design future states. I also like to see this eventually represented in something that we can call a canonical, like, truth of what the solution is. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people will talk about it as a solution design document. That's a methodology that people will work towards. I've seen them designed a lot of different ways. Frankly, the way I like to see solution design documents done is that you have like an architecture repository, and it is an emergent feature of the architecture
Yeah.
repository that a solution design document becomes. But if you're just doing this on pen and paper, or you're doing this, hopefully not, but if you're starting the conversation about what things you'll need for a solution design document, I've got a couple of ideas as you lay it out. It's huge. It's a huge document.
Well, I don't like the documents. I don't like, in general, I don't like documents, because what do you do with documents?
Sure, they are created to die. I know.
I've been on too many SAP implementations where they created scripts that then created some documentation, and nobody, hear it again, nobody read the 700-page documentation. Not even the guy who pressed the button. They just checked a box. I like, and I don't know if it's emerging. There's a Norwegian EA tool, which shall not be named, that has a super neat feature, and I forget how they call it. But you basically can take different diagrams that you create in content And it's like the old Microsoft, I think it was called binders, where you could take different files and assemble that and say, oh, this is everything you need that's relevant for this project, for this
Hmm.
solution, right?
Well, there's a few architecture tools that can do that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the point I think we're trying to make is that the information for a solution design document is contained within your architecture repository, because if you've done your job right, that's where you've built it in context with your organization. But to give you a sense, I want to go over a couple of things that I see on solution design documents that I like.
Yeah, wait, hold on before you go to this. If your tool doesn't have that, right, that feature, because you
Sure.
chose a different one, um, make sure that you have that single place to go for that project or for that
Yes.
solution, right? That could be something like a start model, where you just put shortcuts on to say, oh yeah, this is our business view, and this is our tech view, and this is our risk view, whatever, where you link to it. So make it easy for people. And now I zip up, and you might want to restart your thought.
No, it's fine. I mean, you're right. No matter what, even if you can't, generate this kind of document or create it and agree on it, at least
Hmm.
having a place where people can go and get the truth is really important. And particularly when you're proposing solutions that will meaningfully change people's lives,
Hmm.
that's important. So, if solution design documents, I've seen a ton of them. They generally have a few different sections in them. The first, they'll try and define a purpose and scope and assumptions, those sort of things. So you'll like lay out, what am I doing here, and why am I doing it? Then you want to be able to explain to everyone who's reading it what the business context is. So, what is the purpose of this? Who are my stakeholders? What are the requirements that we were given to give you sort of a background for the value of this solution? Then you want to lay out the architecture, from a high level architecture document, or architecture view into technical components. Sort of go
Hmm.
down layer by layer as you go through your architecture. Those technical components can include hardware, applications, data, security. As I mentioned before, for a lot of organizations, it's really important to use solution patterns. So
Hmm.
things that are very common for and approved for use within your organization. Here's what we're going to reuse. You also might want to dig into certain things depending on what you're focused on. A big common thing is data. So digging into data model and data storage, data privacy, security, these sorts of things, particularly if you're handling PII, like identifiable information for individuals, that's important for you to not fall foul of regulatory obligations. Speaking of regulatory obligations, if you have them, it's good to lay that out. Here are the things we are required to oblige. Here's what we touch along the way in the solution architecture, just to make sure people know what you're doing. Then solution architecture often is partnered in with your implementation team to talk about the deployment architecture. What is this going to look like? Is this going to be a cloud solution, an on-premise solution, or a hybrid deployment? Where is it going to be deployed? What are the hardware and software requirements, network requirements that are going to go along with this deployment? Then we start to talk about integration. Oftentimes, we have a lot of other partners who we're working with that are already implemented solutions. How are we tying to them? How does data interchange? Are we using the APIs, and how are we doing that? What is our system integration pattern? What are interoperability? Are we creating an overall solution? And then we also bring in other partners. We talked about like people you got to know. There's lots of folks from testing who might want to be able to talk about this. So, how are we doing UAT, or what sort of regression testing are we doing on changes that were going on in the system? How are we going to maintain this system? How are we going to support this system? These are all different sorts of things we might lay into there. And that gives you a whole document upon which you can sort of build the 99% picture of what this would look like if it were running. And as people contribute to it, they start to co-own it. And that makes it so that, well, you are a shepherd, you are not the whole herd. And in fact, the whole herd is what you're looking to do. Does that make sense,
Well,
Roland? You use those before?
it does, but I'm so happy that going forward, starting next year, we don't have to do all that stuff, because we just
AI.
implement AI versions, and we don't need to
Oh
know
boy.
how the AI comes to some solutions. We just do what they tell us. Isn't that how it works?
Yeah, here's the thing. My wonderful partner, she's far smarter than I, has an expression I love, which is she said, "Don't ask the AI to do something for you that you could not do yourself, because then you'll never know if it's wrong."
Mhm.
So, solution architecture using AI as an accelerator, great. Using AI as a replacement for knowledge and skill set, not so great.
Yeah.
because you're more likely to crash than you are to succeed. It the small mistakes really add up. Think of it like tolerances in a physical manufacturing sense. As you start stacking tolerances and stacking tolerances, every little thing contributes to a much worse picture. So be careful about that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that comes to mind is there's still some basics true also when defining solutions for AI. And one of the truths is that um, you shouldn't automate a crappy process.
Yeah.
Right. You should go and you should rethink your process first. And while you're doing that, then you might think about, hey, how do I implement that with whatever fancy technology is out there?
Yeah, the way that I think about it is don't fix your systems, fix your problems. If all you're doing is
Yeah.
fixing systems, then all you're ever gonna get is more systems. And
Oh,
that
more
system could
debt,
include
technical debt.
physical
Yeah.
systems or technical systems, it could include people systems. Don't fix your systems, fix your problems. If it's taking too long for a customer to get something, great. Fix that problem, not fix the problem of our person is taking too long to do this step.
Yeah.
That's not the problem.
But JM, let me ask you another question.
Please.
Um, you mentioned that big beautiful document.
Yes.
I think first of all, I think it's two, right? Or you have two different audiences in there.
Sure.
One is the business, where you have to describe the alignment and the cost and all that type of stuff. What business people want to know, and then you have more like a technical blueprint. It's how do we actually do it? Yeah, and then nerds can hang out on it. But the ultimate question that I have, um, maybe for you and maybe to close out the episode, because we're time checking far in, is, well, how do I implement this? Right. I
Yeah.
understand I need to do this. I see the benefit of solution architecture, but now I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, well, how? What is your recommendation on or do you have some pointers for our listeners on the how?
Well, I think you mentioned before, and I'll go into this again. This kind of thing is a project, or more specifically, a program when you get into looking at organizations. And so, in that way, you kind of have the project management approaches, whether or not you
Hmm.
want to look at a long waterfall of things that have dependencies analyzed as they drop through the various phases of transformation. Solution architecture plays a role in each, and you use project management to sort of coordinate the activities and efforts along this waterfall of a project. You can also go agile, and you risk a little bit more because things are changing much more quickly. You have to be aware of the how small changes and small sprints can lead to big effects on other parts of the projects you're working with. But it I feel like I've seen a lot of waterfall projects with solution architecture fall afoul because an impact just keeps getting worse
Hmm.
as each layer drops. I know people talk a lot about DevOps. I mean, this is a question of how we want to manage the practice of developing solutions and implementing those solutions within organizations. I would say that you want to coordinate. This is a non-answer, but it is an answer that I like. You want to coordinate it with the project management offices you have and the professionals who are comfortable managing large scale solution architecture projects. And once again, as a solution architect, you're working under the auspices of another person's office.
Hmm.
And in that way, the best thing you can do is support them in their practice and try to introduce the best practices you have in your tools to be able to make that successful. So,
Yeah.
once again, I've worked at a lot of waterfall projects just because of the time that I was more of a consultant for this, and solution architecture at the table at a strategic level during a waterfall project or program can work really well when done well. And if you can keep people informed, you can keep a sort of canonical set of information. That's why I like that big STD. I happen to like that because that's a canonical set of information, and anyone can see it at any time,
Hmm.
particularly if it's contained in an architecture tool. Then you can run very large scale projects that result in major transformations amongst a lot of solution architecture that goes into a comprehensive outcome for the business, a solution that will actually deliver better service to their customers or help to support their employees doing their business better.
Yeah, I've seen different things. Obviously, 20, 30 years ago, it was waterfall, right? End of story. I've also seen agile projects becoming so rigid that they were waterfall, right? Don't want to go down the route of scaled agile. But there's one thing that I really like, and that's the idea, the underlying idea that DevOps have. And that is, in plain English, you build it, you own it.
Sure.
Because I think where people drop the ball is when they think solution architecture development is just a checkbox.
Right.
Right. Oh, I've done my work. I move on. Right. I think it's that responsibility that you need to have so that you see your solution end to end. Right. And not just see it as, hey, I'm just the car mechanic on the assembly line, I don't know why the car doesn't run. I put in the seat perfectly. Right. I think that's an attitude thing.
Yeah.
But maybe to move on, the next thing that I think, if we talk about how to implement this, so project management, DevOps, all that type of stuff, the next thing is what we mentioned many, many times, and we just had 2 episodes about that, which is org change management, right? Those guys are the people who actually bring your solution to life, right? They are the guys on the front line dealing with the people, right? Because everything in technology is solvable, right? Put a smart guy on it and he figures it out what it is. But you need to sell an org change, a
Yeah.
role change, a permission change, all that type of stuff. You need to sell it to people. Oh, and by the way, not only selling in the sense of marketing, but you also need to train them, right? You need to grab their heart and let them feel the love, right? That you bring to it,
Yes. Well, I mean,
right?
engagement, enablement, like coaching, facilitation, like all these things. Like you want to give feedback sessions. You want to have people in town halls being able to voice their concerns, learn and grow together, recognize achievements along the way. All the good stuff that happens with OCM. Like the change management is your friend. And note that solution architecture doesn't go away the minute the solution is designed. As you mentioned before, we want to keep going with go live and post go live support. Like
Yeah,
remember, think about go live. That is a huge event. And once again, depending on how you're managing your project, that could happen more frequently than in an agile model or DevOps model, where you could be releasing things more quickly, more frequently. You want to be celebrating that and supporting those go lives so that people can see the cutover, can see the new process in life. And if they have a challenge with it, the solution architecture is on call, on hand to take a look at what we might be going wrong with the
yeah,
implementation and figure out how to do some support and get it back on track.
yeah. I think this is grossly, no, overly underrated. Because
Overly underrated.
overly underrated. Well, that's a nice snippet for our cutout. Anyways, so I think it's significantly underrated because yes, you have those org change management people, right, who try to address brain and heart of people, but you actually run into problems, right? The thing might not start that you built, or things are missing. You need the people who fix things, right? Because you lose credibility if you don't have the people who have the mandate. In most cases, they don't, but have the mandate to make a decision call and say, this sucks. I need to fix it because then those people can't work. I don't care about the necessary approval. It's a temporary solution that I put in. Oh, and by the way, I turn around and go to the solution architect and ask them the question, WTF, what went wrong here? And they would have to come up with something, right? And then, yeah, and then maybe the last one, because we don't want to have this to be the endless episode here. The last one is obviously the production timeframe. So what I've seen is the post go live support typically is the project team that keep them around for a little bit longer, because they know what they built, right? But then at some point in time, you will hand it over, right? It becomes business as usual. And I think the focus here is more on not only support, right? There's always new people that you have to onboard and train and all that stuff. But it's also those guys are the ones who should capture the data that's need to measure if the benefits were realized, right? And they need to go back and tell the enterprise level, like, hey JM, great idea, didn't work out that way, right? So
Well, I
they
mean,
need
they're
to
not
know
the
that.
only ones. Remember, business value engineering is a discipline, but solution architecture definitely contributes to the business value engineering that goes into benefits realization and subsequent project kickoff, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, speaking about benefits realization and subsequent benefits to come, Roland, I wanted to put a close to the episode and talk about benefits realized. This was great. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about this discipline. It's something that's important to both of us, and also to hopefully a lot of our listeners out there who either are solution architects and hey, you recognize yourselves, or are future solution architects. Welcome to the club. And who would like to hear more from What's Your Baseline. We want to first and foremost turn it back to Roland. Hold up that book one more time, because what'syourbaseline.com is where you can find successful architecture implementations.
No, here.
What's Your Baseline publication. Go on, get the book, enjoy reading through some of Roland's thoughts that have sort of spurred the conversations you've heard over the past 92 episodes, 93 episodes now. It's a great way to support the podcast, but more importantly, to get the great information that's involved.
Yeah, and JM, since we skipped the second music break, right? The one thing that I want to give back to the audience is, first of all, a heartfelt thank you for hanging in there with us. You know, I forgot to say it, we crossed the 2,000 followers mark. Ooh, and the 50,000 downloads and blah, blah. But we're taking a little break. Right.
Yes.
So as we do between seasons, so I don't have the info here when we're gonna restart. So give or take 4 weeks is a little break. What I will do is I will schedule and bring back into your feed something that we did in season 2, where we did the little what's your baseline short episodes. You know, 15 minutes, one topic, so that you don't miss us too much in your vacation. But I obviously wish you a wonderful summer, right? And I hope that we see each other then in season 9, which will be more than fine.
But until then, keep liking, sharing, subscribing, loving, and talking about What's Your Baseline and architecture. And until then, I've been J.M. Erlinson.
And I've been Roland Volt.
And we'll see you next season.